Occasionally, we hear about a story that intrigues us to the point that we want to pass it on. The occult case of Netta Fornario death in Iona, Scotland. It's just that kind of story. Although the details surrounding her death are unsubstantiated and cannot be verified due to lack of information, it makes for a fascinating story nonetheless. In the late summer of 1929, a woman around 30 years old, Netta Fornario, left London for Iona, a small Scottish island rich in folklore and history. She was not an ordinary woman of the times. She was a member of the Alpha et Omega, a splinter group of the famous Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Alpha et Omega was rich in occult practices, such as ritual magic, tarot cards, mythicism, and a solid belief in the powers of telepathy, and supposedly, Netta had a deep interest in fairies. It is not clear why Netta made this journey. However, she packed an extraordinarily large amount of luggage, clearly intending to stay in Iona for quite some time. Once on the island, Netta found lodgings with a local landlady named Mrs. McRae, who was in the habit of taking visitors under her roof. The two made a strange pair, the humble islander and the occult practitioner, but some form of friendship developed between the two. Netta spent most of her days wandering the tiny island alone, and spent her nights engaged in various supernatural practices. For many weeks this arrangement went on without a problem, but something changed as the summer fell into autumn. The first indication that something was wrong was a cryptic message Netta sent to her London housekeeper. It stated that she would be out of communication for a while because she had a terrible case of healing to work on. Netta's apparent distress escalated until the morning of November 17th, when McRae arose to find Netta in a frenzy of packing her luggage. She informed the landlady that she needed to return to London immediately, as several individuals were attacking her telepathically. McRae was sceptical. She found nothing odd in Netta's appearance until she noticed that Netta's shiny silver jewellery had completely tarnished to black overnight. McRae told Netta that it would not be possible to travel that day. The boat to the mainland did not run on Sundays. Netta became enraged and retreated to her room. After several hours, she came back out and calmly announced to McRae that she had changed her mind and would be staying on Iona. She then went out for some of her usual daily walks. McRae was used to Netta going off by herself, so she was not immediately alarmed when she didn't return that afternoon. When darkness came, and Netta still hadn't returned, however, McRae raised the alarm. The night was far too cold and windy for anyone to be wandering the island. Even though Iona is a small island, it took 2 days to find Netta's body. This sight was unusual, to say the least. A cross had been cut into the turf with a dagger, which was found nearby, and Netta's body was lying on top of it. She was found only wearing a thin black cloak. The doctor who examined the body could not narrow down the time of death. Therefore, he pronounced that she could have died at any time from the 17th to the 19th, when her body was found. He apparently also had trouble determining a cause of death, so he covered all the bases and settled on either exposure to the elements or heart failure, neither of which could account for mysterious deep scratches on Netta's body and on the bottoms of her feet. Was she running from something? This may indeed be a case for a young woman, ignorant of deadly effects of high winds and freezing temperatures, becoming lost and confused during a dark night on an isolated Scottish island. Her fellow practitioners of magical arts, however, were convinced that Netta Fornario was killed by a psychic telepathic attack generated by someone many miles away. The night of July 22nd, 1934, brought about the violent death of one of America's criminal masterminds. Or maybe not. The question of whether infamous bank robber John Dillinger was gunned down upon leaving a movie theatre in Chicago is still debated today. Did John Dillinger really die on July 22, 1934? Looking back, Dillinger started his troubled life in an unassuming part of Indianapolis. As a teenager, he frequently got into fights, bullied younger children, and began honing his skills at taking things that belonged to others. One story has him stealing coal from incoming trains and selling it to local residents and merchants. As a young man, in an attempt to turn over a new leaf, John Dillinger enlisted in the US Navy. He proved to be a poor sailor and deserted only a few months into his assignment. Then began his unparalleled career as an expert bank robber. His well-planned robberies netted cash ranging from $3,500 to $74,000. He also stole and stockpiled guns for use in his criminal exploits. Although frequently apprehended by the law, he also escaped from prison more than once. But it all had come to an end. The legal authorities were following every lead in order to bring down John Dillinger and his henchmen. Eventually, he was betrayed by one of his female acquaintances, Anna Sage. Sage, a native of Romania, was threatened with deportation because she had spent significant time in America running a brothel. Sage made a deal with the authorities that she would help them ensnare Dillinger if the deportation process was stopped. They agreed. On the night of July 22, 1934, Dillinger and Sage and another woman all went to the movies. As they were leaving the theatre, federal agents and Chicago police officers surrounded the place. They quickly spotted Sage in the company of a man and a woman. The man had to be Dillinger. The authorities moved quickly, gunning down Dillinger as he tried to run down a side alley. The agents and police breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that Dillinger's reign of crime had to come to an end. Or had it? Before the corpse was cold, doubts began to register. First off, John Dillinger's father was brought in, and he flat out denied the corpse was his son. Additionally, the pathologist's official report merely added fuel to the fire. He noted that while the face looked very much like Dillinger, the corpse's eyes were brown, and Dillinger's were blue. The corpse had a lifelong rheumatic heart condition. Dillinger never would have been able to join the Navy with such a condition. Known scars on Dillinger's body were not found on the corpse, and the body was shorter and fatter than Dillinger's known measurements. If this wasn't John Dillinger on the slab in Chicago, where did the criminal kingpin go? He certainly didn't continue with his criminal career. Although banks would continue to be robbed, none of those crimes had anyone resembling Dillinger present. One gangster stated much later that Dillinger had gotten married and moved to Oregon, where he lived out his life under an assumed name. A crime researcher investigating Dillinger's life proposed that Dillinger spent the rest of his life working as a machinist in California. The hide-and-seek ambiguity of Dillinger's demise makes for an appropriate ending to one of America's most successful bank robbers. What are your thoughts? Did John Dillinger really die in Chicago? Was it murder? Was it an accident? These questions still haunt the case of the missing Australian Margaret Clement, who is now known as the Lady of the Swamp. Margaret's fortunes were accidental. Her father worked as a caretaker at Bowles. He impossibly bought some shares in a gold mine, which skyrocketed in value. Suddenly the Clements could afford the best in schools, clothes, and vacation tours of famous sites. Her father died in 1890, and in 1907, Margaret and one of her sisters bought Tunnery, a mansion with approximately 20 stately rooms in South Gippsland in the land down under. The mansion was a fine one, although the location was mostly surrounded by swamp and floodwaters. Margaret travelled and enjoyed a plush life until the 1920s, when it was discovered that men she and her sister trusted with their fortune were crooks who had taken most of the Clement fortune for themselves. There was no other way around it. Sections of the Tunnery property would have to be sold. Eventually the financial situation got worse, and Margaret and her sister had to resort to buying cheap food at a local store and watching their mansion crumble into ruins. By the 1950s, almost all of the money was gone, and Margaret, stayed in Tullery, even though it had no electricity or other common necessities. Eventually, the situation became so dire that Margaret was almost forced into selling her land, and she moved into a small cottage on the estate. It was here she spent her time reading mystery novels and taking care of her dog Dingo. The puzzle started on May 22nd, 1952. Margaret vanished off the face of the earth, possibly unconnected, but intriguing. Her dog had died from having its throat cut about 2 weeks previously. Did she wander off into the swamp, or perhaps fall prey to some of the snakes and rodents who thrived in the murky water? Did she commit suicide? Or, as evidence seems to point, was she murdered? The most important clue turned out to be a simple but significant piece of wood, her walking stick. She never wandered outside without it, but it was found at her house. It seemed Margaret did not leave the house under her own power, wherever she had gone, since she didn't have her walking stick. A local man was suspected, but without a body or other clear clues, nobody was prosecuted. The newspapers in Australia created a frenzy regarding Margaret's mysterious disappearance. She was soon dubbed the Lady of the Swamp, and every small clue or conjecture was vividly reported. A set of bones found in 1978 seemed, after investigation, to belong to an Aboriginal woman. Margaret vanished, and to this day, nobody knows where or why. As an avid reader of murder mysteries, Margaret probably enjoys that. The act of murder can be a barbaric one. Some obvious cases of murder go on to be infamous in the annals of criminal history, whether the police solve them or not. One unsolved death took place in the first week of January 1935. A tall man with a facial scar and a cauliflower ear entered the hotel president in Kansas City, Missouri, and asked for a single room several floors up for one night. Just like any other usual hotel guest, he paid a fee and signed the register under the name of Roland T. Owen. Even though the man brought no luggage with him, bellboy Randolph Prosp accompanied him to room 1046. On the way, Owen opened up to Prosp about his original plans. Owen revealed that he prepared another hotel, the Mulebatch, but he thought the cost of a room was too high there. Once the pair reached the room, Owen removed several items from his pocket: a comb, a toothbrush, and a brush. He put all of them into the bathroom, and then both men left the room. After Owens took the key from the bellboy, he left the hotel. Later on that day, a maid went to clean room 1046. Owen had returned to the room, and he allowed the maid inside to clean. He did insist that the door remain unlocked, as he was expecting a visitor. The maid did as Owen instructed, but she did notice a few things. He had drawn the curtains, and a single lamp provided all the illumination in the room. It was enough for her to notice that Owen seemed nervous or anxious. Before she managed to finish the room, Owen left, but reminded her once again to leave the door unlocked when she left. At about 4 p.m, the maid returned to the room with a clutch of fresh towels. Owen had returned to the room during her absence and was lying on the bed fully clothed. Nothing else about the room was different, but there was a note on the table that someone had handwritten. It read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." What happened between then and 10:30 the following morning is uncertain. Once again, the maid came to clean the room. Someone had locked the door from the outside, but Owen was inside the room. He was sitting in a chair and not talking. All he seemed to be doing was staring into the darkness. The phone rang and Owen answered it. Whoever was on the other end had spoken first. Owen replied after a moment, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast." Owen hung up and turned to the maid and mentioned the hotel to her as well. He also asked her about the president and what she was supposed to do there. The maid could not get out of that room quick enough. Later on that day, she brought fresh towels back to the room. Before she could enter the room, a pair of male voices could be heard. From her position outside the room, she explained why she was there. A new voice, not Owen's, bluntly told her towels were not needed. The mate simply left them alone. Sometime after this exchange, a new guest registered with the hotel. Mrs. Jean Owen was not related to Roland T. Owen, but was given the room next to his. Several times during the night, Mrs. Owen was disturbed by sounds of an argument. One voice was male, the other female. She then heard sounds of scuffle and a gasping noise. She assumed it to be someone snoring. The nocturnal elevator operator, Charles Blotcher, also reported after-hours activity. According to Blotcher, there was a party taking place in room 1055, and a familiar woman trying to find room 1026. Blotcher saw this same woman several times during the night. The last time she was in the company of a man. At 4 a.m, she finally left the hotel. The man she was seen with left about 15 minutes after her. Neither was either identified. Robert Lane also reported a strange event that happened to him while driving down a street at around 11 p.m. the day Owen registered. A man dressed only in his underwear flagged down Lane's car, thinking it was a taxi. Lane explained that he was just a city worker, but did agree to take the man to a place where he could get a taxi. Lane did notice a wound on the man's arm and mentioned it. The passenger just nodded and swore revenge against someone tomorrow. Whoever this man was, he was less than complimentary and used several expletives to underline his point. At 7 a.m, the phone in room 1046 was off the hook. The telephone operator at the hotel first noticed it. 3 hours later, it was still off the hook. Pross was sent back to the room to replace it. When he arrived, Pross found the door was locked and a Do Not Disturb sign was hanging on the handle. Pross knocked and was invited in. The door was still locked. Pross knocked on the door once more but was told to turn on the lights. Pross knocked another couple of times but was still unable to get inside the room. His patience had worn thin, and he bellowed at the occupant to replace the receiver on the phone. An hour and a half later, the operator noticed that the phone was still off the hook. Another bellboy, Harold Pike, was sent to investigate. Pike took a passkey with him and forced to use it. Owen was lying on the bed without any clothes on. The telephone stand had been nudged and the phone itself was lying on the floor. Like Pross before him, Pike regarded Owen as drunk and sleeping off a hangover. The phone was replaced and Pike left the room. Within an hour, the phone was reportedly off the hook once again. Pross was sent to the room again. Like before, the sign on the door was on display. Pross knocked a few times, but got no answer from within the room. He had no other option but to use his passkey to gain access. Inside, it was immediately evident that Owen wasn't suffering the effects of alcohol. He still had no clothes on, but was crouched over on the floor. His head was bloodied and the walls were covered in bloodstains. Pross fled the room, called his manager, who called the police. The first that Owen told them when they arrived was that he fell against the bathtub. Police officers searched the room for clues. What they didn't find was as strange as the things they did find. Not a single stitch of clothing was found in the entire room. The standard hotel room requests these, such as shampoo and towels, etc., were all missing. Aside from the blood-soaked walls, police found evidence that someone else was in the room. A label from a tie was discovered. 4 fingerprints were found on the lampshade, as well as a couple of discarded items, an unsmoked cigarette and a hairpin. Police came to the conclusion that about 6 hours before he was discovered, Owen was tortured by a person, or persons, unknown for reasons that were unknown. Owen's injuries were severe and would later prove to be fatal. The investigation into finding Roland T. Owen's killer didn't start very well. One of the first discoveries that was made was that Roland Owen was actually an alias. One woman phoned in a tip that Owen lived in Clinton, Missouri, when his corpse was put on public display in an effort to help identify him. Several people came forward and said that they knew him. One of these was Robert Lane, who said that this was the man who mistook him for a taxi. Multiple bartenders also stated that Owen was the man they had seen in the company of different women. Police did make a couple of discoveries that they thought may have provided a breakthrough. A man matching Roland T. Owen's description did indeed spend some time in the Melbach, as well as the Kansas City Hotel and St. Regis Hotel. The name used at the Melbach was Eugene Scott, which turned out to be another alias. The staff at the Regis said that an unidentified man accompanied Owen at their hotel. Police concentrated their efforts to find Don instead. With just a Christian name, there wasn't much to go on. Don may have been the man visiting Owen who insisted to the maid that fresh towels were not necessary. He could have been the guest that left the hotel just after 4 p.m, or he could have been the man in the Regis. Perhaps he was the target of Owen's wrath and got his in first. Police never found out if Don was any of those or none of them. Just after a week after the strange events of January 2nd, a new lead came into light. Local wrestling promoter Tony Bernardi said that Owen resembled a man that turned up the previous December to register for wrestling matches. According to Bernardi, Owen used the name Cecile Warner. This information did not shed any more light on the deceased. Without knowing Owen's true name, there was little hope of ever finding his killer. At best, they had a scenario that fits the facts that they knew them. The hairpin find linked the argument overheard by Mrs. Owen, which could have linked to the second man telling the maid not to bother with new towels. This would indicate some sort of love triangle leading to the death of Roland T. Owen. This is all speculation, and hearsay though. Preparations for the funeral were not being made until March. Shortly before the funeral was due to take place, an anonymous phone call from a man that never identified himself was answered by the head of the funeral home. The caller asked the funeral to be delayed so that money for the service could be sent over. The man claimed to be Owen's potential brother-in-law and that Owen was indeed the deceased's genuine name. The caller also mentioned that Owen had got into difficulties and that investigators were on the wrong track. A few days later, money for the service arrived with no return address. Their funeral took place at Memorial Park Cemetery, and the only mourners were investigating officers. With the victim of his bizarre murder interred, details might have been buried along with him. For a while, that was what had happened. In 1936, a woman calling herself Eleanor Ogletree read the magazine American Weekly. Reading the account in the magazine, it occurred to her that the image of Roland T. Owen published in the article strongly resembled her missing brother, Artemis. The last time Artemis was seen was when he left home in Birmingham, Alabama, in April 1934. He said that he wanted to see the country. Approximately a year after he left, the initial letter of 3 arrived through the post. Someone had briefly typed each missive, and this aroused suspicion from Eleanor's mother, Ruby. As far as Ruby was aware, Artemis didn't know how to type. Several months after the final letter arrived, which stated that he was sailing to Europe, a man calling himself Jordan phoned the family. Jordan provided an update on Artemis that said his life was saved by the missing son and that he had married a woman in Cairo. When Ruby was shown a photo of Owen, she recognized him as their missing son. At the time, Artemis was only 17 years of age. If Roland T. Owen was, in reality, Artemis Ogletree, then it raises quite a lot of questions that have no answers. Why did he use so many aliases? Who was Dawn and Louise, and what role, if any, did they play in Owen's death? What was the Ogletree doing in Kansas? What relationship did Jordan have with him? Was Jordan the man seen at the hotel the night Owen died? Who paid for the funeral? Perhaps there will never be a solution to the murder, but on more than one occasion police have reopened this odd cold case. The first time was in 1937, while the last was in 2003. In 1937, detectives noticed a similar death that took place in New York. No links between the crimes or both victims could be established, and the Owen case went cold once more. Renewed interest in Roland T. Owen surfaced in 2003 when someone got in touch with Kansas City Public Library librarian John Horner by phone. The caller didn't identify himself, but did say they phoned from outside Missouri and that someone had recently passed away. While he was scouring the belongings of the recently deceased person, he discovered a box full of old newspaper clippings. All of these clippings were about the murder of Roland T. Owen. Also in the box was something that the newspaper reports had mentioned. The caller refused to say what this something was. Ever since 1936, speculation has been rampant as to what exactly took place in the room 1046. The honest truth is that there is very little in way of evidence to support any of the prevailing theories. It could well be a professional hit, but on a possible teenager, it might well be a love triangle that went wrong. Maybe that is why Owen hit the bathtub. The story of the Burke and Hare murder dolls starts with a series of murders committed in Edinburgh, Scotland, that occurred in the late 1820s. The mystery of the murder dolls begins around the same time and continues until this day. It is a strange mystery that may have some connection to the guilt or sadistic obsessions of one of the killers. Not long after a series of murders took place in Edinburgh, Scotland, a boy found an interesting group of dolls in tiny coffins. They found the dolls in a cave in Arthur's Seat in Holyrood Park in Edinburgh. Initially, the dolls appeared odd, but did not seem to have any significance beyond their oddness and the location in which they were found. Over time, it became obvious that they were very similar in number and appearance to victims of the recent killing spree. William Burke and William Hare were two Irishmen who met in Scotland and became friends sometime in the 1820s. Hare ran a boarding house with his wife. There, in 1828, one of the tenants died of natural causes. Burke and Hare sold the body of the man to a doctor at Edinburgh University to be used as a medical school cadaver. At the time, the medical schools had a shortage of bodies to use for dissection. They were only allowed to use executed criminals, and criminals were being executed less frequently. Doctors were sometimes resorting to purchasing bodies from so-called body snatchers, or more accurately, grave robbers. It appeared that one Dr. Knox of the University of Edinburgh was not averse to purchasing the bodies of murder victims either, though it is not absolutely certain that he was aware of the fact he had started doing it. After selling the body of the deceased tenant, Burke and Hare realised that they could make a living off selling the bodies of the dead. They were making less than the equivalent of $1,500 in modern currency per body, but that was enough to compel them to kill 16 individuals. Many were killed by smothering, though one was given a medication overdose and a little boy had his back broken. Eventually, a tenant found a body underneath a bed at the boarding house and turned the pair into the police. The body was gone by the time the police got there. However, Hare made a deal and told in exchange for his freedom. Burke was executed and dissected publicly, and several of his body parts, including the death mask of his face, were saved. Hare walked. No one knows what happened to him. The dolls discovered in the cave numbered 17. They also appeared to represent each of the bodies sold to Dr. Knox, who was not charged with any crime. The dolls are roughly 4 inches long each and have their own individual coffins. Dating puts them around the same time as the murders, and many assume that one of the killers is responsible for carving the dolls. Modern DNA testing conducted on the body of Burke and on the dolls found no connection, but this is because there was nothing to find on the dolls after all this time. If indeed the dolls were made during the killings, only a handful of people could have done the carving. There was Dr. Knox, who likely knew that the cadavers he was purchasing were murder victims. There were Burke and Hare, Hare's mistress, and Burke's wife. Dr. Knox's brother possibly knew as well, but there were almost certainly no more people who could have made the dolls. One of these people could have made the dolls out of guilt. Of course, one of the killers could have made the dolls as souvenirs and stashed them in a cave when the murders were discovered. Hare could have made them after Burke's murder trial and stashed them as well. If they were made after the murders were discovered, it could have been anybody. There are currently only 8 of the original 17 murder dolls left. They are kept at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. The dissected remains of one of the men who killed the people the dolls reportedly represent, Burke, are kept at the University of Edinburgh. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. You can also leave a comment below. All feedback, good or otherwise, is always appreciated. If you have any creepy stories of your own, or of any topics that you would like me to cover, feel free to send them in via any of my social media. You can find all links to my social media in the description below. Until next time guys, make sure you lock your doors, stay safe, and I'll see you next video.